Chapter 17. An account of my first days in the mine as well of the circus that came to Charleston. Clayton Nicewander was rude to Mr. Wheaton and didn't take no nonsense from the Spraggers, but he was a good teacher. He was 16 years old, 5 years older than me, and as patient as I needed. He didn't laugh or yell when I fumbled with my lamp or forgot which part of the mine to visit first. He taught me everything I needed to know, from how to get the stubbornest mule to work a bit longer, to how to find my way to the safety if my lamp fell or burned out if I was stranded in the dark. The mule knows the way, even in the pitch dark without no light at all. Just get off the car, feel your way to her side, and take off her harness. Throw an arm over her back and walk with her toward the stable. She'll lead you to one of the miners or back to the stable, and you can hold on just like that all the way there. A man loses all sense of direction in total darkness, but that don't happen to a mule, so you've got to rely on her to get you to safety. Some of the mules was more stubborn than others, and one day when we was driving an old fellow named Piston, I cracked my whip on his backside and kicked him in his rear to get him going. "Don't be doing that," scolded Clayton. "He ain't even carrying half a car. If you have to whip him now, you'll never get him to carry 4 cars of coal for you." "Well, how do I get him to move then?" "You gotta make him think you're gonna whip him. Crack a warning in the air about 3 feet above his ears. If he still won't move, crack it again, only lower. Then again if you have to, but don't do more than sting the tips of his ears. Otherwise he'll get used to being whipped. Then he'll figure out it ain't as bad as hauling 8 tons of coal and you're sunk. He'll lie down on the tracks and won't move at all, letting you whip him all you please. But he won't pull any coal for you. Then he'll send word around to the other mules that you're a cruel driver and none of 'em will work for you. I ain't figured out how they communicate like that, but they do." Clayton taught me all the different routes in the mine. He told me which ones to visit first and how to keep pace with the miners. "Don't take off till you double-check the miner slipped his tag on the car. See here?" He pointed to a curved nail at the front of the car. "Each miner has his own number engraved on a brass tag. He puts it right here on this hook. If it's not there, the foreman won't credit him for all that coal he loaded, and he's out his money." Some miner was angry every time they saw us, complaining we was lazy and slow and making 'em lose money. Others said nothing, just gave us a quick nod, and we coupled their full car and left an empty one behind. I was glad to see Uncle Jim on our route. "How you doing there, Billy? How you doing, Clayton?" he asked. He stopped digging at the face to chat, asking how things were going in one part of the mine or how Clayton's mother was getting on. She was a widow, and just like Clyde's ma, she ran one of the company boarding houses. Clayton's pa and older brother died when he was just 3. They was suffocated by the black damp, which is a type of poison gas that builds up when the coal is pulled out of the earth. Clayton said not to worry none about the angry fellows. He said it warn't nothing personal, just what happens to some men because of the nature of the work. A miner only gets paid for the coal he produces, but before he can fill up a car, there's a whole lot of things he has to do that he ain't paid for. He went on to tell me how the miners got to chip away at the bottom of the face, then blast it with explosives, then dig out the rubble to get a new seam of coal in the mountain. The company gives them the timbers to support the roof, but the miner has to put them in place. Likewise, the company provides the track, but the miner has to lay it into the room. All this takes 2 days or more, and he ain't paid for any of it. A miner don't earn a dime till he fills that car we bring him with coal, and then he only gets 20 cents a ton. Much as I don't like being yelled at, I understand the angry miners. Miners get a raw deal from the company. Once he finished training me, Clayton would be driving a two-mule team and getting a man's wages. I was glad to know I'd be seeing him regular, though. He'd be at the stables in the morning when we was picking up our mules, and at the end of the workday when we was feeding them and cleaning out their stables. On our last day working together, he introduced me to my mule, Markle. "Markle's a decent mule," he said, scratching him between the ears. "He was my mule when I first came to the mine. Remember to whip just above his ears and not his backside, and he'll work hard for you." "How old is he?" I asked. I took over scratching him and looked into his huge eyes. They was shiny and dark. "Can't say. He was here before I come, probably spent all but a few weeks of his life in the mine." "Imagine, a whole life in the mine." "Don't say it, Billy," Clayton groaned. "I don't wish that on any creature." That evening we came out of the mine to see the whole town had been papered with circus posters. There must have been 100 of them, plastered on every fence and building and light post from Main Street to the depot. My eyes ricocheted from one to the other as I walked home. Over and over we read the same thing, that for one night only in Charleston, the Frederick Ainsworth Circus presents King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, an exotic spectacle of ancient days. Uncle Jim was as thrilled as anyone to see the posters. He nearly dropped his pick and lunch pail in the street with happiness, just like he said he would, and he took me to see the circus. He invited Clyde and Belton to come with us, but only Clyde came since Belton was too excitable for a circus. Aunt Agnes had no interest whatsoever in such foolishness. She told us to watch for the pickpockets that worked the crowds and said she'd just as soon stay home and get some work done. I'll spend the day boiling my herbs and making tinctures for the coming winter. Uncle Jim loved the parade as much as the show, so we left Holly Glen on an early train and got into Charleston by noon. We walked from the station into the town till we got to the courthouse, where Uncle Jim said we'd have a good view of the parade. Plenty of Charleston folks had already staked out their places, but I couldn't complain none. We had a fine view when the parade came by a few hours later. In the meantime, we ate our lunch on the steps. Afterward, Uncle Jim let Clyde and me wander through town while he saved our seats. Oh, Charleston's beautiful town, with paved sidewalks and fine buildings. Seemed like every wooden one was painted a nice color. Others were made of brick or granite, and some was even carved from solid marble. The marble ones was mostly banks. They had gold grates over the windows, all fancied and filigreed, but strong too, so a robber couldn't bust through and take the money. Uncle Jim gave us each a nickel to get an ice cream. I asked if he wanted us to bring him back a cone, but he said no, he didn't want none. Just sitting in the shade, resting his eyes, was all the treat he needed. Finally, the parade begun, and all the folks sitting on the steps stood up to whoop and clap and wave their hats. First came the most magnificent white and gold carriage, led by 8 white horses with red plumes on their heads. Up top was a swarm of ladies waving at us. They was dressed like temple dancers, with flowing veils and fans of peacock feathers and gold bracelets round their arms. All the circus folk was dressed from the time of Egypt, which pleased Uncle Jim to no end, since he was right fond of old-time things. The last circus he saw was called King Arthur and His Merry Knights, and he was delighted this one was so different. "Look at that, boys," he said when the tumblers came by, dressed in gold pantaloons and doing their flips and twists easy as pie right there in the street. "Oh, the glory of it! Oh, if only my mother were alive to see it! How she loved the tumblers!" Some desert Arabs on their stallions was next, looking as lofty and airy as you please. Then came some more gorgeous wagons, all painted right pretty and gaudy, carrying the fiercest tigers and lions, each one growling away and swiping between the bars. Another pack of ladies in temple costumes came next, dancing about with bells round their ankles, playing little cymbals and kicking up their legs. In and out of the whole throng of performers was a pair of circus clowns chasing each other. Their faces was painted white, and they wore the tiniest little hats and played the most bent, out-of-tune instruments you ever did hear. Clyde and I laughed our heads off at 'em, for they was so quick and rambunctious. They kicked one of the tumblers in the pants, then ran off before he could catch 'em, interrupting the jugglers and making 'em drop their balls and so forth. We followed the tail end of the parade to the circus grounds. Hundreds of folks was there for the show. Kids ran about laughing and calling out, begging their parents for an extra penny to buy some cotton candy or a candied apple. Uncle Jim bought us a program to read while we waited for the show to begin. On the back page was a list of all the cities the circus would tour. One wasn't far from Albright, and I wished that somehow or another my friends Peggy and Rufus could see it. For a little while, even while the band was playing and the ringmaster led out one of the clowns with his pack of trick dogs, I felt lonesome for them. I couldn't enjoy what was in front of me for wondering what fate had befallen Rufus, and wishing that somehow he and Peggy might be able to see the spectacle Clyde, Uncle Jim, and I was about to enjoy. For a while I was right sad, but I have to say I was taken over by what was before me, for the circus was splendid, even better than the parade. The dancing and dramatic parts told the story of how the Queen of Sheba sailed along the Nile with all her dancing girls and slaves to seek counsel from King Solomon. He greeted her with all manner of beasts, including camels and lions, as well as musicians and dancers of his own. Then he gave her a great party with jugglers and acrobats for entertainment. Later on, she tried tricking him with fake flowers to see how wise he really was. When he passed her test, she poured out all her troubles and implored him to help her. He set her straight on all that ailed her, and back to Sheba she went with her radiant barge, with Solomon and all his folks waving goodbye. In between scenes from the story were all kinds of acts. There were fire-eaters, animal tamers, trapeze artists, tightrope walkers, and even a Wild West show where the horsemen acted out Custer's defeat at Little Bighorn, including the part where Custer gets scalped. It was so realistic Clyde and I hid our eyes. Otherwise I was right transfixed. Couldn't take my eyes off 'em, for the Indians was stunning trick riders. I decided right then and there that's what I'd want to be if I was ever lucky enough to be in a circus. One stood on the back of his galloping stallion to throw a tomahawk at General Custer, and he was calm and steady like he was standing on a chair. Uncle Jim out and out booed it, saying a Wild West scene had no part in a spectacle about King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. Despite this, Uncle Jim agreed with me and Clyde that it was right bully circus, the splendidest one that could ever be. We walked back through town to the train station, laughing and arguing about which was the best part. Clyde and I fell asleep in the waiting room till the train arrived sometime past midnight. Uncle Jim helped us get on board and find some seats, and then we fell back asleep until we arrived home in Holly Glen. We walked Clyde to his house, then stumbled into ours, sleeping soundly till late Sunday morning. When we woke, Aunt Agnes had a big breakfast for us. She sat with us as we ate and wanted to hear all about the show. Much as she liked our recounting of it, she was glad she didn't go. She'd prepared all her remedies and was ready for winter. It was going to be a nasty year for the gripe. She could tell by the way the leaves were drying up so soon without turning orange.